Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about forecasting and heat. If you haven't met me before, my name's Millie Shields and I work for the Queensland Department of Primary Industries. And today I'm joined by Vicky Main, who's a climate mate with the Northern Australia Climate Program. And also online we have Dr. Chris Lucas from the Bureau of Meteorology to assist with any targeted questions at the end of the presentation. So before I get too much further into it, I'd like to acknowledge that this webinar is brought to you by the Making Maidens Weight producer demonstration site, which is funded by Meat and Livestock Australia and is supported by GrazingFutures, Livestock Business Resilience and Leading Sheep projects. You can find out more about the PDS, as we call it, by visiting the Leading Sheep website or getting in contact with myself or David Council. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them in the question box at any time and we'll endeavour to answer them all in the Q&A session at the end of Vicky's presentation. You may have noticed that as you joined today, you've automatically been muted with your camera turned off. So this session will be more like a webinar than a discussion, but I will unmute you if you pop your hand up in the Q&A session at the end. So hopefully that works for us. All things going well, today's presentation will be recorded and will become available on the Leading Sheep website under the Queensland Producer Group's webpage. I'll circulate a link for that once we're finished here today. And also after today's session, I'll pop a link to a feedback form in the chat. We'd really appreciate it if you could take 2 to 3 minutes of your time to answer a few questions for us. Which really helps us demonstrate the value of these sessions so that going forwards we can continue to deliver webinars and events that are valuable to you. So thanks in advance, and I'll come back to this at the end of the webinar. So now I would like to hand over to Vicky Main, who some of you may have come across through her work as a climate mate for our region here in the North and Central West. And you may have worked with her one-on-one or attended one of her workshops or seen a presentation at various industry events or just subscribing to her quarterly newsletter. So thanks for jumping on here with us today, Vicky, and I'll get you to share your slides for us.
Thanks, Millie. Just bear with me and I'm sure I can get this to work. Oh. Okay. Okay, can you see that okay?
Just coming through. Can see your desktop. Yeah, got that now.
Beautiful. Not sure, Mel, what's going on here. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me to present today. For those of you who aren't aware of the Northern Australian Climate Program, we like to say we're the ultimate research, development and extension program. We're about connecting producers back with the climate research team that are embedded in the Bureau of Meteorology and at the University of Southern Queensland. So that feedback is actually from producers through people like myself, a climate mate, actually help to influence the development of things like the chance of early northern rainfall onset and of course our cattle comfort index. Who am I? Well, I'm actually a beef producer primarily, and I'm also a climate mate. I'm also just started being a university student at the ripe old age of 53. So I'm really heavily invested in actually understanding better how climate actually does impact livestock thermal stress. As you'll see, I've spent a fair bit of time in the northern part of Australia, managing some very difficult landscapes. And also my husband and I were part of Killarney Park and lived there for numerous years, managing that at Tambo on the Tambo Alpha Road. This is who I'm not, is probably more important. I'm not a climatologist or a meteorologist, and I'm not a research fellow or a scientist or a BOM employee, and I'm definitely not a livestock nutritionist, veterinarian or thermal stress expert. But what I am is a climate mate, and I get to work with these beautiful people, and in particularly John Goggin, who we like to say is the world's leading expert in livestock thermal stress. Why I use seasonal outlooks, sticking to the theme of today, it's to better manage and plan for my reproduction programs so that ultimately at the end of the day, I have some top quality saleable carcasses and genetic material that I can sell on to other producers. So there's some key considerations to look at when we're looking at weather forecasts and seasonal outlook tools to manage livestock thermal stress. And that thermal stress can also be chill and heat. Livestock thermal load and thermal stress, you sometimes hear it interchangeable. I'm just wondering why. I do apologise. I had notes here and they're just not wanting to show for me. Anyway, livestock thermal load, it actually refers to that external and internal heat energy that an animal must manage. It includes all those environmental factors, not just temperature, but also humidity, solar radiation and wind, and also that metabolic heat production from digestion, activity, movement, handling, those sorts of things. So understanding thermal load is crucial if you're going to design effective strategies to mitigate that thermal stress. We say when an animal's tipped from thermal load into thermal stress, that's when you start to see that in the environment that animal's normally exposed to, they're now starting to not handle those environmental conditions. It's outside of their comfort zone. So there's a lot of stresses that contribute to livestock thermal stress, and that's probably why you haven't heard a lot of focus, especially when dealing with fertility and that sort of thing. We know there's a lot of research and development being done into nutrition, age and weight of heifers and ewes, that sort of thing when it comes to managing for pregnancy losses and survivability of our neonatals. But that's because thermal stress is a really tricky beast. And hopefully going forward in the future, we're going to start to see a lot more developments in this space, a lot more focus down the research side. But it is important to know that we can't control climate and weather. You can't control the humidity, temperature, rain, solar radiation or wind. But when you understand what drives these and timing and how it influences, it makes it so much easier to better manage and control all of these other stresses that go in over here. You know, we know that airflow, for example, when we see lack of airflow at all, especially in feedlot systems, that's when, you know, it has a significant impact on that thermal stress. So if you're putting your stock, we know that, you know, if you're scanning, crutching, doing anything through that January, February period, we know that shearers hate seeing fleeces wet. So we'll go and put everything underneath those shearing sheds to keep them dry. That lack of airflow, especially if they're on that tipping point, that cusp of going from that thermal load into thermal stress, just know that inadequate airflow will be a significant contributor to some of that thermal stress. And even things like we've been learning through our learnings from John Goggin, that even our wool coverage and even the microns, we know that coarser wool is able to actually trap a dense layer of heat into the wool, which actually acts as a thermal blanket. It repels that solar radiation. So the finer the micron, the less ability that wool is actually able to have that protective layer of heat trapped in. So yeah, it's a really tricky one. There's just so many factors, even vaccinations that, you know, increase core temperatures, our, you know, mustering movements and timing. and even down to just mud and dust as well can impact. So especially dusty conditions impact the lungs, and then they're not able to pant as efficiently as we would like if they've ever gone through and had any compromisation of those lungs. So we know that, you know, we've seen this old adage, I don't trust bomb anymore. I've started looking to science for nature, and we understand that at times seasonal outlooks can be cloudy with a chance of confusion and even to the knowledgeable. But it really is imperative that we understand and we look to our seasonal outlooks to start to, if we're going to have that lead time in how we're going to manage for thermal stress. One of the key things is how climate and forecast fit are you? I know that one of the questions that we had come through that today was, can we just concentrate on heat? We understand, have a good understanding of, you know, the weather and climate talks, but just how fit are you? You know, like, do you have a good basic understanding? If we're really seriously going to deal with thermal stress, we then need to get to, you know, being this fit and this savvy and understanding what actually drives and those temperature, humidity, and that increased convection that happens, that traps in daytime temperatures in through the night. It really is important to know the difference between when we're looking at anything, whether we're looking at weather and or climate forecasts, and particularly with weather and temperature, these can change within minutes or hours. So that weather is those conditions over the atmosphere over a shorter period of time, and we know that that climate is how the atmosphere behaves over a longer period of time and space. This is just a refresher for anybody that's not quite familiar with how to interpret a Bureau of Meteorology weather forecast, and that also applies to those such as Elders and the Willy weather. So if we have a look at this coming Tuesday, the 10th of December, we see there's a 40% chance of receiving 0 to 2 mil of rain. But what does that actually mean? Well, that chance of any rain is any rain over that 0.2 of a mil. And the smaller value, or the 0, there's a 50% chance of receiving that. And then the larger value is then that 25% chance. When we're looking at any weather forecast, it's also important to look at when was that date issued. We know that the further out a forecast is, the likely that there's that potential for it to change, especially when you're looking at weather forecasts that are saying that they're out to 10 days and accurate. Just know that, as we said, weather can change over a course of minutes, hours, and days. When we're trying to mitigate and look at weather forecast for heat stress, we really need to look at our minimum temperatures. A lot of people do focus on maximum temperatures. So if we were just to look at the maximum temperatures there, you think, oh, yeah, it's going to be really hot. This is what one of the key drivers is, our minimum temperatures when we're looking at accumulated heat load in our livestock. When our nighttime temperatures are staying above at 24 degrees or above, we know that that is a significant contributing factor to the accumulated heat load. Our livestock need and ruminants need between that 6 to 8 hours of our nighttime temperatures being under that 24 degrees if they're going to dissipate that day's heat load that they've had before they go into the next day. If they don't get that, and particularly before 3 a.m, they then carry this heat load into the next day. When you start to have more than 3 days worth, we really start to see metabolic and physiological changes within our livestock. So it's really crucial to have a look at your minimum temperatures. Don't just focus on your maximum temperatures. And that was just that 3 consecutive days. So understanding weather and climate, we need to understand that it's influenced by more than one factor at any one time. And these environmental phenomena vary greatly in the length and time that they actually influence seasonal conditions. Environmental phenomena, better known as our climate drivers, they really do shift the odds for the likely seasonal conditions and weather extremes that we're likely to experience. Our sea surface, these are some of the key drivers that, or influences that we need to focus on if we're looking at mitigating thermal stress. Many producers look at these climate influences to gauge how the season may shape up for rainfall, but do they actually look at how they typically impact upon temperatures during certain time periods and seasons? So this is just a quick schematic, and you've probably all seen this before, but I just wanted to recap. Understanding that clouds trap in that daytime heat that's, you know, accumulated through the day. That's why what raises those nighttime temperatures. When we've got increased cloud coverage, which is, you know, has occurred through the increased water vapor, it traps in more heat. We tend to see, you know, a little bit cooler than average days, or around those average daytime temperatures, but this cloud really does trap in that nighttime heat. And it all stems from our oceans and our land surfaces. So we see this warming increases the evaporation, which leads to increased water vapor, which then leads to those increased cloud coverage. So when we look at our sea surface temperature anomaly maps, this is my first go-to thing as a producer that I look at when I'm looking to any of my management decisions, and before I start to look at a seasonal outlook on the Bureau of Meteorology side or any of the sites. I like to get a bit of a vibe. Think of these sea surface temperature maps a bit like a bathroom, and when we've got those warmer waters pooling around, warmer water anomalies pooling around Australia, there's that increased chance of that convection occurring, so that likely chance of increased cloud cover. It's really important when looking at these maps, if you're looking at the previous week, that you are looking at the weekly average and or the previous month. Look at the weekly average if you're looking at those weather forecasts in the next week. You go back to your previous month and look at those sustained monthly anomalies when you're starting to look at those your bigger climate drivers like your Indian Ocean dipole or your El Nino southern oscillations. Now I've just zoomed in here, it's not very clear, but you can see if we look, this is just from last week, so I think they had it at the issued on the 24th of November. We can see we've got these warmer than normal anomalies that have been pooling around Australia. Not overly strong as compared to some of the other parts of the globe, but we can see that, you know, there's certainly not that cool bathroom effect happening. We've certainly got a little bit of that warming bathroom effect happening. When I jump in and have a look at the climate outlooks for the weeks, months and season ahead, and this is the latest that's been issued from the Bureau of Meteorology for December through to February for summer, the first thing I do is I jump in and I have a look at the climate influences. Go in and what I'm looking for is, okay, what is those global sea surface temperatures doing, and, you know, where are they at? What's that Indian Ocean dipole doing at the moment? Because we're in that December period now, but through spring I've certainly been paying attention to this and to ENSO, because the Indian Ocean dipole, it typically has that effect up until about December, and you've seen an IOD event typically wanes as the Australian monsoon then descends. And I like to know what the southern annular mode is doing. So if we look at the Indian Ocean dipole, currently at the moment, they have the Indian Ocean dipole as negative. So what does that mean? Well, typically a negative IOD from October through to December for your rainfall deciles. This is a composition map that you can find on the Bureau of Meteorology's site. The IOD typically has its biggest influence on thermal load in spring, and we can see that increased, you know, rainfall events that likely occur. The IOD has been later to hit to that negative event and have an influence, which we've certainly been experiencing over the past couple of weeks. When we look at the temperatures, if we see for the maximum, we can see those cooler maximum temperatures. And if you remember that schematic that I showed before, that's typically because that solar radiation can't get in and penetrate sort of through those clouds, and it doesn't warm up as much. But in the same token, we do tend to see some warmer minimum temperature anomalies, or close to those average temperatures in that long reach Barcaldine region. Now, the southern annular mode, this is one that I really do like to pay attention to, and that's because SAM can rapidly fluctuate from positive to negative and back to positive again. And particularly for us through summer, going into autumn, and when you're going to have those autumn lambings, just know it's those big fluctuations in temperatures where we've seen 10 degrees or more of those fluctuations, where we've gone from, 40-degree days nexting down to, those, into the 28s, or those nighttime temperatures have gone from being high up into the 26, 27s, and then rapidly dropping down to those 14 degrees. Our livestock just don't like that happening, and it does contribute then to that thermal load and that thermal stress on them. So SAM is one to pay attention to, and in summer you'll see he increases that chance of rain. What he basically does is as that subtropical ridge goes further south, it has like a bit of a lasso effect around here off our eastern coast, and it drags these clouds that have been occurring and systems off our east coast and draws it downwards through, and it increases that chance of rainfall. So this schematic's a pretty good one there. So again, we see that potentially that cooler nighttime, but with that increased cloud coverage and that convection, it's raising of those nighttime temperatures. And then in summer, if SAM goes negative, which is what starting to see at the moment, a little bit of that cool, drier period. SAM then, that subtropical ridge is pushed further to the north, pushing away that convection. Now, this is the latest southern annular mode, the latest index. Now, you see it gets out, you'll see it's quite tight in here. This is what I like to look at. I don't pay too much attention to what's happening out here. SAM is a rapidly changing beast. He's that erratic cattle dog that we just don't rely on in the yards. And as you can see, he can go from being, quite highly positive there in around about the 18th to 20th of November there, to then dropping down to being into our negative indices. You'll see it's tighter here because there's a little bit more forecast accuracy over the next sort of 7 days with SAM, and then the forecast accuracy really does spill out. But he is one to pay attention to, because it's his rapid fluctuations. If he turns around and goes highly positive again, we know that there's that increased chance of those wetter conditions, that cloud coverage, etc., going to happen, and those warmer temperatures. The Madden-Julian oscillation is one we all hear about, the MJO, and people typically tend to look at the MJO as that lovely rainfall band that's going to come through and impact on rain. Just know that the Madden-Julian oscillation also does drive, especially when it's coming through our maritime continent in phase 4 there, it does have an impact on our minimum temperatures typically. And we can see that here. You can find these diagrams on the Bureau of Meteorology's website. This is the average conditions that the MJO has shown from December to January, from 1974 to 2021. So you can see there was that increase in those minimum temperatures, and we've been seeing that as we get out. You can start to follow through this phase diagram, and you can also see the wind directions as well that occurs. If we have a look at the MJO's impact on the average conditions on our maximum temperatures, we see that a little bit in that phase 3, heading more to the northwestern part of Queensland there. We don't tend to see typically too much of an impact. It's sort of more those average. That phase 1, you can see it certainly does have a bit of an impact there for our area in raising those temperatures through, so that, yeah, it is one to start to pay attention to. But as I mentioned, we really do want to have a look at what's going to drive up those minimum temperatures as well as those maximum temperatures. And this is just the MJO on that rainfall and looking in your area, and we can see there that the MJO, as it's coming through in those phase 4s and 5s and some 6s, starts to have a little bit of an influence on your rainfall, which is what, you know, been seeing over the past week there as it's been moving through. So for those who aren't familiar with the MJO, just know that this is what has occurred, where the MJO has tracked. And then as we get into the black line, then that's the forecast mean, the ensemble mean, and all these squiggly lines is each of the ensemble members where they're predicting to go. So MJO isn't quite as erratic as SAM, but it certainly can be. Now, looking at what the outlook is looking like for December, I like to look at the outlook scenarios, the 75% chance of at least. I don't like to look at the chance of above median maps, because as a producer, it really doesn't tell me very much at all. If you click on the hourglass, we know that you put in your area that you want, and the beautiful part about it is it automatically brings up your median. Understanding that any of these seasonal outlook maps and forecasts, they're really not of any value to you unless you know what your historical mean is, to be able to then drive a comparison there. So we can see there's certainly a wetter signal showing for December, looking at our December outlook. So just remembering that our historical median for Longreach is only 30.5 millimetres of rain. So if you're really looking for that to be hitting that good green day, get your green new season's growth happening, typically December's not the period of time for that. And for anybody that's not aware of your green date, that's your 50 mils over 3 consecutive days to stimulate new pasture growth. That translates into live weight gain in our stock. If we have a look then at our temperatures, our maximum temperatures, I like to look at the difference from average, and I like to see what it is. Typically, historical median for Longreach from the 7th to the 13th of December is 37.6 degrees. So we can see that forecast certainly was pushing up for this week and into the following week. When you're paying attention, you'll see just how much different from average it is when you bring up your area and actually get what your historical median. So again, we're seeing there's quite a strong signal for being at quite warmer than average. When we have a look, when we're looking at temperatures too, you'll notice that when you're looking at the difference from average, it's only going to bring up a 1 week out to sort of the end of December in 2 week blocks. It won't go out any further than that. And remember, because weather changes quite rapidly. So when we look at our minimum temperatures, historically your median minimum temperatures is 22.4 degrees. And again, where there's a very strong signal showing. And if we look back at that sea surface temperature anomaly maps, we know that there's, you know, quite that warm bathroom effect happening at the moment, and an increased chance of cloud and that convection to trap in those daytime temperatures, which explains why there's such a strong signal showing there. Now, it's really important to remember when we're looking and talking about livestock thermal stress, and understanding that majority of you that are on the webinar today are through your leading sheep and you produce a demonstration site for your sheep. So that's why I've just got the schematic of the heat stress in small ruminants showing there. When we're looking at mitigating risk, and especially in those pregnant females, I know it's been a really large concern for you all, what had occurred this year, lambing numbers being so down considerably. We know we had those back-to-back heat load events. So when we talk about those heat load events, they were those events where we saw those sustained nighttime temperatures being 24 degrees or above, combined with hotter daytime temperatures. We had increase in temperatures, humidity, and the likes. One of the things that we do know with our livestock, they can get through that first heat event quite okay. But if we get another heat load event that happens, you know, within that next sort of 14 to 21 days, we know that typically our livestock haven't recovered enough. So they're already, you know, they're still haven't fully recovered metabolically and physiologically from the first event. What starts to happen and what we see is that, especially in our pregnant females, they will divert blood flow away from the uterus. And that's because the uterus and our reproductive organs just aren't vital in keeping us alive. They'll divert those blood flow away to the peripheries and to keep those vital organs cool and that brain cool. So the first thing to be compromised is our uterine blood flow. Now, what that means is very early pregnancies, there's a likely chance of them being absorbed. You have, you know, compromised those fetuses that do survive. Typically, they're lighter, smaller, immunosuppressed animals that hit the ground. I know there was a lot of conversation around, but we weren't seeing any lamb losses around watering points or, you know, what's going on. That's because what we tend to see is, as we know, as the afternoon starts to cool down a little bit, they'll go out and graze. Stock will come into water and around their watering points to get that evaporative cooling. One of the things you will see is that, you know, you might do your crutching, say in January, February, quite fine, and do your scanning, and you've got shade, all that happening. You don't see that open pant, sort of tongue out really occurring a lot in your sheep, and you think they're great. But have a look at your water points. Have a look, you know, at those sheep yards. You go over, are you seeing those dominant sheep standing over your water points, actually looking for that evaporative cooling? Because what happens then is they're actually keeping those non-dominant pregnant younger ewes away, and they're not able to get a drink. And then what happens is we've also then got dehydration and that sort of thing occurring. So in the afternoon, when they start to go away to graze, we know in the livestock, and this is in cattle, but we do know that typically that 3 to 5 a.m. is the death hour. And that's typically because too, the wind really dies down through the night, and that lack of airflow, as I mentioned, or that wind contributes significantly to livestock losses and deaths. So you could be seeing those fetal losses are actually occurring, or those lambings and those very immunosuppressed young lambs actually being born well away from those watering points through the night, and those losses occurring, and you're just not seeing them around your lick and water points. I know this is a cattle comfort index, but on our NACPI website, we have developed what's called the cattle comfort index. Talking with John Goggin, you know, this is a good vibe for sheep. There just isn't enough research in grazing sheep to be able to develop this at the moment, but this can give you a really good vibe. It plays through in 3-hourly intervals. And as you can see, Tim Cowan, one of our NACPI team, and John Goggin have developed this. And you can see we're in for some quite hot conditions, and it's showing up as being quite considerable and into that extreme for cattle. So the same for sheep. We've got an accumulated heat load forecast. So remember that accumulated heat load is when they can't get that overnight cooling happening. It's sustained from those 3 days or more, 3 nights or more of those minimum temperatures being up, then with those daytime temperatures also being hot, they start to then have this accumulation. One of the things talking to John is that, you know, probably a good thing to look at maybe for the merino is looking at sort of maybe around that Santa Gertrudis or that the Wagyu is a good one to maybe put in for your sheep. but as I said, we're just not 100% sure there. So use this as a good vibe to get a good indication of just those accumulated factors. Now, I just want to quickly show you this, just getting back to it, and I'm going to apologise very much. I don't know why my notes aren't showing up here that I so meticulously put in, but the Bureau of Meteorology is having some changes. So if you're used to seeing this site here on the Bureau of Meteorology's page, know that they're changing things up just when we're all starting to get used to everything. So from about the 10th of December, we're going to see some significant changes and the way they communicate. So one of the things is, and why it's on, is just this shift that they've seen through from that statistical modelling to dynamic modelling, and just understanding that with the changing climate that we're seeing is how that's actually having an impact on actually modelling and forecasts. So one of the things they are moving to, you won't see any more climate driver update here. You're going to have to go in and find it through what they're now going to call the Southern Hemisphere Monitoring and the Southern Hemisphere Outlooks. Okay, so if you're looking for ENSO, IOD, all of that sort of stuff, it's going to be under that Southern Hemisphere Monitoring, and all our seasonal outlooks are now going to be under Southern Hemisphere Outlooks. And then to get the MJO, you've got to go to a different spot, and it'll be under the Tropical Monitoring and Outlooks, which is just below. So I personally don't like the name Southern Hemisphere Monitoring and Outlooks, but anyway, it's all to do with Australia there. So this is what it currently looks like. They're taking away this La Nina watch, and they're also taking away the consensus model, the international models, and what they're all doing. I know if you've been to any of my workshops, we do drive it into you to have a look at this. Don't just check bomb. Is there a general consensus? They're no longer going to have this available. They are talking about bringing in the cornucopias. I can never say it properly. Chris, when he jumps in, will be able to say it for me, but they are looking to bring that suite through. But and the reason they're taking this away, this has been something the media has really jumped on and not used well, and led to a lot of misinterpretation of forecasts. So they're scrapping it. That's just the basic drift. I wish I had the lovely spiel that the Bureau did have, but as I said, it's not showing up. So just to understand, and also to the Bureau of Meteorology will no longer be referring to the climate drivers as climate drivers. They're going to be referring them to as climate influencers, or in those environmental phenomena that influence our climate. So just be aware that if you hear of any of the media reports and on landline, things like that, and they're talking about the climate influences, they're talking about those climate drivers. You can still subscribe. They'll no longer be sending out some of the certain products, and that what I will do, because my notes haven't shown up here today, I'll actually put a spiel together for Millie and send out to you, but also be aware of what the Bureau is putting out. To wrap up my talk, just really know your risk profile when you're managing for livestock thermal stress. How much can you afford to gamble? Only you know, and I know that some of the questions come through is, you know, what lick supplements can we put in? You know, how can we manage, you know, for thermal stress? It really does come down to when the timing of when you're doing things. How much can you afford to gamble with, and how much can you afford to risk? And what's going to give you the biggest shift in your odds to actually effectively mitigate in your favour? That's something that only you can answer. As I said, if you need to have a really good understanding of what does drive temperature, humidity and wind and that convection, and understand these drivers. Having just a good basic understanding is fine, but if you really start to love it and understand it and make it part of your DNA, you'll actually start to see opportunities open up before your eyes, and for mitigating that risk. You'll start to look at your paddocks differently. You'll start to look at your rotations or your muster differently, how you work animals through the yard, how you manage them as soon as you've finished with them in the yards. You'll start to see how you can actually more effectively manage for livestock thermal stress. I'll certainly send this through to Millie, but this is how to become climate and thermal load savvy. This is what I believe in. This is what gets me through. I've actually completely changed up when I carve out here on my property, and it's all based on the learnings that I do. It works for my property and my business structure and what I'm looking to achieve. And I know that, you know, I've certainly increased my weight gains. I've certainly increased my calving survivability and having those more robust, and my pregnancy rates, especially with my AI and embryo transfers. But what I do is different from other people, and it may not be relevant for you, but this is a good start for you in mitigating that stress. That's me, so I'll stop sharing there. Hopefully, yeah, you could find that all okay and interesting. I'd love to know some questions and see how we can best help there. And again, my apologies that I didn't have those Bureau of Meteorology notes showing through. So.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I think we'll move on to question time. If anyone has any questions, you can either pop it in the chat or the Q&A box, or raise your hand and I should be able to unmute you if you'd like to ask it verbally instead. But yeah, in the meantime, I think it's, yeah, understanding your risk around all this sort of stuff is really important, and I guess you can get a bit of an idea about your level of risk or your willingness to manage for heat if you keep some good records over time, over a couple of seasons, and climate records, you know, temperature and wind, and sort of compare it to what you're seeing on the other end with lamb marking results, and lambing percentage if you collect that as well. So if you collect a little bit of data and you're starting to see some trends, then you know you might identify that it's a good opportunity to think a bit more about the heat side of things. Vicky, do you have any experiences with sheep producers out this way or in general as to what they're doing to manage around heat, and if they're making any significant changes in their business relating to that?
Yeah, we do, Millie. It's one of the things both John Goggin, myself and Tim Cowan, we've actually become quite passionate about your area out there, and especially what's happened over the last couple of seasons. And we've been heavily working with a particular family there to help. Now, they're trying a couple of different strategies. We actually went to their property, John Goggin and myself, in the midst of them actually doing their crutching, just to have a look at, you know, what was the pant score looking like actually on those sheep, what were the conditions around, and looking, you know, just what the vegetation coverage was as too, just understanding that the more vegetation coverage you have, the better you can actually assist in mitigating that thermal stress. So, and particularly for neonatals, whether it be calves or lambs, and whether it be Brahmins, Wagyu, Angus, it doesn't matter. Those neonatal animals up to their first 14 to 21 days of life, they really don't know how to thermal regulate properly. It's something that they slowly learn how to do. They're so susceptible. So having them being actually born and in an area where you've got those really good vegetation coverage is crucial. But getting back to what you asked, Millie, we went and we spent a lot of time actually working through and to understand what you guys have all been facing out there. And one of the things we have been doing is overlaying historical temperature records, humidity and wind over the area, and having a look at how many back-to-back heat load events had occurred. Last year was phenomenal. How many is had? You're only getting like 2-3 days break and bang, another heat load event that just kept going. So just understand that whenever we're moving stock, whenever we're doing any management practices to it, it's raising their core body temperature, not just from the stress, but actual the movement, certainly body condition score, nutrition, water quality. One of the things we noticed when we're at that property that day was we could smell the bore water. It was hot. We could smell it. And we could see all these dominant animals standing with beautiful big lengthy trough that they had in the yard, but all the dominants were standing over. They weren't drinking. They were just getting that evaporative cooling actually happening. So we could see a lot of sheep actually walking back and forth, just looking to try and get a drink. So things like that are ways to be able to try and, when you understand what drives heat load events, and when you understand what climate drivers are in play and how long they may stay in play for, such as those increased sea surface temperature anomalies, southern annular mode, fluctuating quite rapidly, things like that, we start to see those opportunities that open up. And just working with these family, they've already started to identify those opportunities, which is really good, because we've been really working on building that knowledge around what's driving those seasonal conditions. So the more savvy you can be understanding your climate drivers. I know that we're all very good at understanding the talk and the rhetoric, and that gets around about seasonal forecasts and outlooks. But as I said, when you can really start to look at how it drives temperature and humidity, you start to look at your livestock and your property and the opportunities a lot different that potentially are there when it comes to thermal stress.
Does anyone have a question there that they'd like to raise their hand for?
And don't forget too, we've actually got Dr. Chris Lucas on from the Bureau of Meteorology, and Chris is an expert too in fire weather, and also he's the gentleman that's quite an expert in those effects of with the water vapor cloud from the volcanoes and that sort of thing. So yeah.
So with people coming into sort of scanning and crutching throughout January, Feb, do you have any recommendations for what they can do if you've got a scanner booked in and you have to just to show up and move the stock in that heat wave, if there is one? Is there any ways that we can reduce our risk of having that impact?
Biggest thing is, especially if you're mustering in by plane or helicopters bringing them in, don't let them gallop all the way into the yards. Block them up, try and cool them down, try and get them closer to those yards in the days leading up if you can. Really slow them down. Just try and slow them down as much as you can. If you see rain threatening, doing all of that, and you've got to put them underneath the sheds to try and keep them dry, is there a way to get them up into the sheds as well? Or just remember that lack of airflow. If you see dominant animals just standing over and looking at evaporative ways, look at ways of trying to get potentially set up some more mobile trough systems that you can move around away from those dominants and get that water. Try and look at ways to potentially cool the water going into those troughs around your yard. And really monitor them when you're sending them back out to the paddocks too, slow and steady. Just know that I do know that working with one family that we've been working with, they'd gone to doing a nighttime crutching, thinking that'd be a good way to mitigate. But just remember, our stock actually need no stress through the night if they're going to try and dissipate that day's heat. So yeah, it doesn't quite work unless you're going to have those nights where it's going to be lovely and cool. Go for it. Set up the lights and go for it. Just take a little bit of a stop and a think approach about everything that you're doing. And also too, knowing that, the crutches, it's hard because you've got to lock them in. If you're really setting your conditions up well and all of that, and understanding that we've got a labour shortage in there, so you have to get locked and loaded, to go when you have to go is how can you make it better that they just might tweak up and come to you when you need them to come to you. You know, I know that's a hard one. I know. I get it because of when I've shifted. I've got to compete with the very big Wagyu breeders when I want my vet to do my AI and embryo transfers now. But I've just really made it, you know, so that he wants to fit us in now. So, yeah, there's some of the strategies. It's tough. Just know if you're really, really pushing for those fine micron, to remember what I mentioned that John had said. We know sheep, you know, they handle it in India and that, but they've got a lot coarser wool. The finer you keep pushing for micron, just understand the inability for the animals to be able to hold in that layer of wool coverage. So we do know that, you know, some people have been looking to potentially have longer fleeces or shorter. There is a couple of research papers. I'll send you the links, Millie. And I see John actually tried to call me while I was presenting. So we'll get that information to you. But yeah, just understand that going forward, this is something that, you know, we're likely to see this increase in temperatures going on, not just for this year, but it, you know, well into the years going forward. Sometimes we have to sacrifice a little bit to gain a lot. And if it means, yeah, if you've got that really, really fine micro, which is a real credit to you, maybe just have to weigh up, understand what those risks are with doing that as well.
Great. And yeah, so that cattle comfort index is now available online, is it, through the NACV website?
Yeah, it is. I might, because we've got still got some minutes there, I'll actually share, I'll bring it over, Millie, and share that site with you. So on our NACV website, we've got these products. If we go down and we click on the cattle thermal stress forecast, you can see here we've got cattle comfort index, the temperature humidity index, the heat load index, and of course that accumulated heat load. And you know, this is the one that we really do like to look at. It plays through in those 3-hourly intervals, so you can see it playing through. Hopefully my internet is good enough there. So this is the cattle comfort index, and it's also for chill as well. It's a really good thing, especially if you've got sheep off shears. If it's showing up for chill for cattle, know that it's definitely going to be showing up for you guys with your sheep off shears or your lambs. And the other one there that we've got is the accumulated heat load. Now you can mix up this here, potentially, yeah, looking, because we don't really know with sheep at the moment, but don't be afraid to put in sort of that Brahman Angus there. If you've got that really finer micron, or you've bought some sheep up from down south, maybe then go in and put in the Angus Hereford, and you can start to see the risk for that accumulated heat load. And again, it'll play through in those 3-hourly increments there over the next 7 days. And then we've actually got the heat load index and your temperature humidity index to play with. If you actually scroll down, it goes quite a bit into how these are calculated and the thresholds that they've worked in. And then it actually does go in and quote the cite the research that was contributed to the development of these products. And there's quite a bit of information there with some direct links that are absolutely fantastic and vital information for trying to wrap your head around how this livestock thermal stress actually works. If we jump into the cattle comfort index as back up, but just refresh. Again, it goes through and it shows you then how that was actually developed. And there's those papers again. Yeah, it's a really good tool. I find it invaluable jumping in and having a look ahead, especially if I'm looking to do, you know, if I lock and load for an embryo flush program or an AI program, once I start needling, I can't stop, you know, like we've got a lock and load, and it's a bit like you guys with your crutching and your lambing. So then by looking at that, I've got a very good visual, and it's in my head. Okay, I need to really look. If it means that I'm going to start sinking my livestock back, you know, or bring them back an hour earlier or 3 hours later to be able to fit in for when we're going to do things. And I've talked to my vet, it allows me to plan a little bit better. So there may be that negotiation there that you can work with contractors. I know it's very difficult though, out your way, but you know, it might be, you know, if you're mustering and that, and you've got all your crew, show your family, show your musterers, and that, look, it's really imperative. We've got to keep them walking in low and slow, coming into those yards. Got to have, you know, plenty of water available for them. Someone did ask about nutrition in the questions. Look, I would really refer to a nutritionist. There are different supplement ingredients, and depending on what you're feeding, that can actually raise up that ruminant temperature and actually get your animals running hotter. So that's something to discuss with them. And just know too, the higher, and I suppose you guys are probably all aware of this, but the higher urea content, you know, that actually then makes your embryos more susceptible then to those absorptional losses. Urea does have quite a significant impact on embryo quality.
Alrighty, well we might leave it there. Thanks, Vicky. I've popped the feedback form link in the Q&A box. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to fill that out for us, and let us know if you'd like any further, like a workshop up in this region with Vicky and John Goggin, early next year before John retires. So yeah, and we're happy to organise that for you if you would like. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Thanks Chris for hopping on here. Thanks Vicky, and we'll circulate the recording and see you next time.
Thanks so much, Melly. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.